إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا وبعد. Okay, we have today a very interesting character to talk about, inshallah. And if you will notice, the characters we talked about, they come from different backgrounds. Some brothers expressed their surprise at the fact that Al-Hasan al-Basri was Persian. Al-Hasan al-Basri was Persian. So today, inshallah, we're going to talk about a person who's not an Arab. Oops. Thanks for saving my life. That's when shape takes precedence over content. Decoration. Right. So today's person is non-Arab, is not a Persian, and is not from India, and is not from Africa. But he's from Atba' al-Tabi'een. He's one of the most notable, famous names. If anyone can guess before I say where he's from, I will inshallah secure a gift for him. The person we're going to talk about was born in Khurasan. Khurasan is in Iran today. Khurasan is the main part of what is known today as Iran. So he was born in the city of Maru, in Khurasan. Yes, Maru, the city of Maru. I don't know really today what it's named. Maybe it's the same name. I'm not sure. City of Maru. There's a lot of scholars from Maru, and in Arabic, when they say someone from Maru, they say Marwazi. Marwazi. So this is why a lot of the Muslim scholars actually their last name is Al-Marwazi. They come from the city of Maru. City of Maru, Al-Marwazi. And interestingly, this is only for human beings, Marwazi. They say from Maru, he's Marwazi. But if the style, like the clothing style, is from Maru, they call it Marwi. They call it Marwi or Marawi. But for people, they call it Marwazi. Marwazi. Okay, the person we're going to talk about his Abu Abdul Rahman al-Marwazi. Has anyone heard of Abu Abdul Rahman al-Marwazi? That's not his famous name, right? He's Abu Abdul Rahman al-Marwazi, and his proper name is Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak. Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, the famous man from Atba' al-Tabi'een. He's probably in his time, he's the number one prolific scholar, in the sense prolific scholar in the sense that he has mastered so many sciences of knowledge that many of the people of his time, many of the scholars of his time, they said he is the number one scholar of our time. So Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak. Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, his father is al-Mubarak. He's Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak ibn Wadih al-Hanzali al-Tamimi. Okay, so he's ascribed to the tribe of Tamim. The tribe of Tamim is an Arab tribe. But his father is not originally from the tribe of Tamim, but at this time, there was something called Al-Mawali. Al-Mawali were the non-Arabs. There was a trend, there was a habit there among the Muslim world that any people who came from a non-Arabic origin, they associated with one of the Arab tribes. They associated with some of the Arab. It started first with the slaves. Slaves, like a slave whose master was from a certain tribe, Islam led to a huge move and trend in freeing slaves. So a lot of the slaves within the first 100 years of Islam, they were freed. So they were called al-Mawali. So they were given back their freedom. And because a lot of those people don't know where their origins were from. So they were attached or annexed to the tribe of their master. So they joined these Arab tribes. And they even adopted their last name. So the same happened to Al-Mubarak, who's the father of Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak. Anyone knows where his father comes from, what origin his father is from? His mother is from Khawarizm. Khawarizm again is in Khurasan. It's in, I think it's in Iran today, Khawarizm. Either in Iran or in Tajikistan. I don't know where Khawarizm is now. Anyway, his father is originally Turkish. His father is Turkish, so he comes from a Turkish origin. His father, Al-Mubarak, is a very interesting person. Very, very interesting person. He was a very righteous man, known for his excessive worship, and at some time of his, at some stage in his life, he was a slave. He was a slave, and he was working for a merchant. And then this merchant, who had a huge garden and a huge farm where Al-Mubarak was working, he had a very interesting story with Al-Mubarak. Al-Mubarak is the father of Abdullah. Okay, so Al-Mubarak was a very righteous man, would do a lot of worship, very honest, very straightforward. And one day, his master, he says to him, he came to his farm and he wanted to rest and chill, have a day out. So he asks Al-Mubarak, he says, get me some pomegranate and make sure it's sweet, not sour. So he goes and gets him one. So he opens it, tastes it, it's sour, too sour. So he says, that's too sour. Give me a sweet one, a sweet pomegranate. So he goes and gets him another one, and it turns out to be sour. Then he says, give me a third one. Now he's upset with him. So he says, give me a third one. He goes and gets him a third one, and it's also, he says, you can't even tell the difference between sweet and sour pomegranate? He says, no, I can't. I don't know what's the difference. How can you tell? He says, why? Haven't you tasted that? He said, I've never tasted it because you never gave me permission. So he had been working with him for years, but he's never tasted the pomegranate there. Why? Because he was not given permission. And that shows you the level of what we call al-wara', keeping away from even things that might be halal, that might be okay for you. Because usually workers, wherever they work, they can consume, they can eat, from the farm, they can eat from the factory, if they work in a restaurant, they do eat some stuff, right? It's by that's the norms. But this person still kept away from that because he wasn't given permission. So the man that he was working for was very impressed with that. He really appreciated it. So he kept an eye on Al-Mubarak. Then later on, he used to converse with Al-Mubarak, started to converse with him more, and he realized this is a very wise man. He's a very wise man. He has his own mind. So one day he says, I want to share with you something. I have my daughter, she's very precious, and I really have a strong love and a sense of protection towards her. A lot of people ask for her hand in marriage, but I don't feel comfortable. I want someone, who do you think I should, give her in marriage to? So Al-Mubarak told them, he said, well, previous nations, you will find, for example, some nations, they would marry a woman for her money, for her wealth. But other nations would marry a woman for her beauty. But in Islam, we marry a woman for her religion. For her religion. So he liked that kind of mentality. So he saw, this is a wise man. So he says to him, what do you think if I give you my daughter in marriage? Obviously that was a big shock. So at that time he freed him and he offered him his daughter in marriage. Why? Because he saw a righteous man, and for him that was more precious than anything else. So you can see what kind of parenthood Abdullah ibn Mubarak received from his father and from his mother, because if his mother was brought up by a man like this who would do such a sacrifice, and their times, that would be probably socially inappropriate. But he had no qualms about that. For him, as long as it was better for the deen of his daughter, so he took that step. So this is the kind of marriage that Abdullah ibn Mubarak came from. There's an interesting story. I said previously when I was talking about Abu Hanifah that one of his students was Abdullah ibn Mubarak. Abdullah ibn Mubarak studied with Abu Hanifah. He studied and he learned a lot of fiqh from Abu Hanifah. And for him, the fiqh of Abu Hanifah was the best. For Abdullah ibn Mubarak, although he had his own school of thought, The fiqh of Abu Hanifah was the best fiqh, in his opinion. So when Abu Hanifah saw the father of Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, he saw al-Mubarak. When he looked at him, he was surprised when he saw him. Then he said to him, in Arabic, he said, لَقَدْ أَدَّتْ أُمُّهُ إِلَيْكَ الْأَمَانَةِ. What does he mean? Basically, when he saw the father of Abdullah al-Mubarak, he said to the father, your wife gave you back your genes. She kept your genes and she handed them down to your son. Like she didn't interfere in his resemblance, in his looks. Because Abdullah al-Mubarak looked exactly like his father. So he said, he basically, and we know that Abu Hanifah rahmatullah alayhi was a very intelligent person. So he said simply like, your wife did not interfere in your genes, she kept them. She handed them completely to your son. No children are known for Abdullah ibn Mubarak. None of the books or the records mention that he had children, so we don't know. He could have, maybe he had, but none of this was documented. He was born in the year 118 after Hijrah. 118 after Hijrah. And he was born, we said, in the city of Maru in Khurasan, which is today in what is known to be Iran. Abdullah ibn Mubarak started studying, learning Arabic, reading and writing and Quran at an early age. So he was sent to Al-Kuttab. Al-Kuttab is like a school, the very basic school, like a madrasa. That's Al-Kuttab. So he was sent to Al-Kuttab where he learned the basics there. And the teachers noticed that he had a very sharp memory. Again, you see this theme keeps popping up in the life of scholars. They had very sharp memory, naturally. So Abdullah ibn Mubarak, there's an example from one of his friends. And he says, and I'm going to recite the quote in Arabic, then translate it in English. One of his friends says, كنا غلمانا في الكتاب فمررت أنا وابن المبارك ورجل يخطب فخطب خطبة طويلة فلما فرغ قال لي ابن المبارك قد حفظتها قال فسمعه رجل من القوم فقال هاتها فأعادها عليه ابن المبارك وقد حفظها. Okay, he says, his friend says, we were young children going to the Kuttab, to the madrasa, to study. So on our way, one day, we passed by this man who was giving a khutbah, giving a speech. And it was such a long speech, so he spoke for long. When he was done with his speech, Abdullah ibn Mubarak turns to me and he says, I've memorized it completely upon hearing it. So one man who was there, one of the attendants, he saw him and he heard that. So he says, okay, if you have memorized it, then deliver it to me now, the whole khutbah. So Abdullah ibn Mubarak repeats the whole khutbah to that man. He repeated the whole khutbah completely as it was. SubhanAllah. So that shows you the level of his memory. But some things now different happened to Abdullah ibn Mubarak. We saw not all the scholars started studying early. We saw that Abu Hanifah rahimahullah started studying later on in life. First he started with argumentation and debates and so on and so forth, but later on he switched to al-fiqh. Others like Imam Shafi'i started from a young age, Imam Malik started from a young age, Ahmad ibn Hanbal started pretty much from a young age. Abdullah ibn Mubarak, yes, he went to Al-Kuttab from a young age, but then he stopped studying. So he lived a life like any normal young man, and he even did some stuff. So he went even the wrong way. He went the wrong way, and he was very good. He was known for his guitar, al-oud, the Arabic, at-tambur, the Arab guitar or the Eastern guitar, okay, that string instrument. He used to play music and he used to sing with it. He used to spend his time chilling with his friends, and that's what they used to do. And some books mention that he actually had a fiancée. So he had a woman that he loved, and he would spend time with her. And it wasn't marriage, but nothing says that he committed zina. Nothing about zina, but he was in a relationship with this woman. He would see her, spend time with her, and talk with her, and chat with her. So she was his fiancée. So that was Abdullah ibn Mubarak. So he lived a life of, like the young men at the time who were not practicing. So he was in what they say in Arabic, al-lahu, He wasn't so much, he was playing with his life. So, something interesting as well, when he was studying with Abu Hanifa found Abdullah Mubarak to be a very interesting person. So he says to him, how did you start studying? Like, what happened? So he asked him, and I'm going to say in Arabic as well. He asked him he says, Abu Hanifa, كيف كان بدء أمرك? How did you start studying? He says, كنت جالسا مع إخواني في البستان فأكلنا وشربنا وكنت مولعا بضرب العود والطنبور ونمت فرأيت في منامي طائرا فوق رأسي على شجرة يقول ألم يأن للذين آمنوا أن تخشع قلوبهم لذكر الله وما نزل من الحق قلت بلى فانتبهت وكسرت عودي فكان أول زهدي. So he says, I was chilling with some of my friends out, we went for a picnic. So we ate and we enjoyed ourselves until it was night time. And he said, I was obsessed with my guitar. I was obsessed with the oud. Then he says, then I slept. I was tired, so I slept. And when it was the later part of the night, I saw in my dream a bird reciting the verse, أَلَمْ يَأْنِ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَن تَخْشَعَ قُلُوبُهُمْ لِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Isn't it time for the believers that their hearts, pay heed and feel the greatness of Allah, feel khushu' and submissiveness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the truth that Allah sent down? So he said, I said to myself, in the dream, yes indeed, that's the time. So he says, I woke up in that moment, straight away I destroyed my guitar, and this was the first time I started practicing. It was the first time I started practicing. So when did he start studying knowledge? At what age? 23. 23, he started studying Islam. And by the way, some people think that's a late age. It's not. It's not a late age. I know sometimes we see people study Islam from a young age and we think, well, maybe it's too late for us. I'm 18, I'm 20, I'm 25, or maybe I'm 30, or even I'm 40, or I'm 50. Yeah, it's too late for me. Why waste my time, get into this? This is something you shouldn't actually do. You shouldn't actually do. Some of the great scholars in Islam, some of the great scholars in Islam started to study Islam later in their life. So this is Imam Ibn al-Mubarak, who was the best in his time. He started studying properly at age 23. Age 23. Many of us consider this to be too late. Al-Imam, the biggest Imam ever in the history of the science of Hadith in terms of ilm al-rijal, knowing the narrators of the Hadith, was Imam al-Dhahabi. Imam al-Dhahabi started studying Islam at age 21. Age 21. He didn't start from 9, 7. There are people who started at that time, but it's not necessary. It's an advantage to start early, but it's not necessary. Some of the great scholars, some of the greatest scholars, the greatest muhaddithin, started studying. One of them was Tawus bin Kaysan. Tawus bin Kaysan al-Yamani, one of the most famous scholars of hadith in the 2nd century, which is the time where Abdullah Mubarak was living. One of the greatest scholars of hadith and narrators of hadith, Tawus ibn Kaysan al-Yamani. Do you know when he started studying? What age? Throw a wild guess. Push it as late as possible. 50? 60? What? 70, yes, 70. He started studying hadith at age 70. 70. 70. And he became one of the top scholars of hadith at his time. So it's not necessarily about age. Yes, it's an advantage to start early, but it's never too late. I think someone wrote a book about the scholars who started studying Islam later on in their life. Someone wrote a book about this. So he compiled the biographies of scholars who started later on, in the later part of their life, and they excelled. Some of the best scholars in the Hanafi fiqh, some of the masters of the Hanafi fiqh started actually, I believe, I forgot his name, but I think he started after 50. And he became one of the best scholars of the Hanafi fiqh. Prior to that, he had a profession. I'm not sure. I think he was a blacksmith. 50 years of his life, he was a blacksmith. And then at age 50, it just popped in his head, I want to study hadith, I want to study fiqh. So he becomes one of the masters, the main teachers in the Hanafi fiqh, subhanAllah. And one of the prolific authors. Ibn al-Mubarak, in terms of knowledge, he was very prolific in the sense that he studied so many sciences and he mastered them. He studied so many sciences, and the way he made a living was through business. So he built his own business, because some of the biographers indicated that his father ended up doing business. Although his father never had a good social or financial status, yet he got engaged in business. But Abdullah ibn Mubarak was a successful businessman, and he managed to actually, provide for himself. So when he started studying Islam at age 23, he started traveling a lot, and his business helped him, because for business he needed to travel as well. So it was easy for him to do both things at the same time. So he was doing business and he was doing the studying and talab al-ilm as he was traveling. And he is probably the one who traveled the most. Imam Ahmad says there is no one who traveled for seeking knowledge more than Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak. No one traveled more than he did for seeking knowledge. And this is because of this. Ibn al-Mubarak says, I've studied with 4,000 shuyukh. I've studied with 4,000 shuyukh. And I narrated from only 1,000 of them. And I will come to explain why. So he studied with 4,000 shuyukh. These are his teachers. So he traveled from Khurasan, which is in Iran, traveled to Iraq, to Basra al-Kufa, traveled to Asham, traveled to Egypt, traveled to Al-Hijaz, to Mecca, Medina. He traveled to Yemen, and he studied with all the scholars in all these areas. So wherever there were scholars, he would travel to them. So any place where there were scholars, he went and studied with them. And he was very intelligent in that. He said, I developed my own tactics in getting a scholar to teach me. So, because by the way, not all scholars were teaching like this. A lot of scholars kept their knowledge to themselves. A lot of scholars only taught a select few, a select number of students, and they would not open up to the public. So Abdullah Mubarak developed some ways and some tactics to get these scholars even to teach him. He even one day he went to prison. He spent some time in prison. He didn't do any offense, but he got himself somehow smuggled into the prison. And the reason was because there was a scholar who was put in prison, so he wanted to study from him. So he went into the prison and he learned from him some hadith. And then when they found out, they kicked him out of the prison. There's one... So he was very keen, and he was a very meticulous student of knowledge. So he would record everything. And he had a very sharp, you would say, recognition of good knowledge. And he was described often like this. He's a person who had a very good sense for evaluating knowledge. So he would not only seek hadith and knowledge, but he would also seek understanding. So if he heard of someone who had a very good understanding, someone who had wisdom, he would actually record that and take that wisdom from that person. An example of this, he once heard that the Hasan al-Basri made a statement, and only Al-Hasan al-Basri made a statement, and only one of his students has it, and it has to do with making friends and enemies, but he didn't know exactly what it was. So he decided to travel. So he traveled from his city of Maru, all the way to Ar-Ri, another city also in what's known today as Iran. Ar-Ri, okay? From Maru to Ar-Ri. The distance between them is about 1,000 kilometers. 1,000 kilometers. Ar-Ri, by the way, there's a lot of scholars from Ar-Ri, the city of Ar-Ri. And the city of Ar-Ri, if a person is from Ar-Ri, what do they, how do they ascribe that person to the city? So we said, Maru, Marwazi. Mecca, Mekki. Medina, Madani, right? Basra, Basri, Kufa, Kufi, Misr, Misri, and so on and so forth. But Arri, how would they ascribe a person who's from Arri? How would they pronounce what they call Nisba? Ar-Razi, yes. Ar-Razi is from Arri. So Razi, last name, indicates that this person is from the city of Arri. Arri, okay? Arri, Razi. So he travels from Maru to Arri in order to meet this one person, one of the students of Al-Hasan al-Basri, who's Harun ibn al-Mughira. To hear that statement from Al-Hasan al-Basri, because he appreciated the wisdom of Al-Hasan al-Basri. And that statement was, since he traveled 1,000 kilometers, and it wasn't, by car, he didn't take the train, he had to ride a horse or a camel to make that. Obviously that's a long journey. So when he got there, he said, he met Harun bin Mughira and he asked him for that statement, then he went back to Maru straight away, not even staying in Arri. So the statement was, since he traveled 1,000 kilometers, it's worth that we mention it now. Al-Hasan al-Basri said, لا تشتري مودة ألف رجل بعداوة رجل واحد. There's a lot of wisdom in this. Do not get yourself the enmity or the hatred of 1,000 people for the sake of getting the friendship of one person. So basically what he is saying, it's the opposite. It's the other way around, yes. Do not get the friendship of 1,000 people, okay, at the expense of getting the enmity of one person. So what is he saying? He's saying, don't ever get yourself in a state of enmity with anyone. Don't get in disputes. Don't get in fights. So he says, 1,000 friendships, 1,000 new friends are not enough to compensate for having one enemy. So that's a lot of wisdom. That's a lot of wisdom. And subhanAllah, you find some people are very generous, with sacrificing that, and they get enemies as they walk along. They make enemies wherever they go. They will find it easy. But that shows a lot of wisdom, because a lot of times when you read in history, a lot of people were actually, their death was caused by one person who hated them. One person who had enmity with them. SubhanAllah. So don't make anyone hold a grudge against you. Unless they have an issue themselves, that's different. But you yourself do not cause enmity with a human being, even if that means you gain or you win 100 friends. It's not worth it. That's what he is saying. So Abdullah ibn Mubarak, he studied with scholars who are older than him and who have more knowledge than him. He studied with scholars who are at the same level with him, same age with him. He also studied from people who had less knowledge than him. He didn't have any issue with that. So there was no ego involved, no pride involved. He would study with any person that he could learn from. And this is why he narrated hadith from people who are considered to be at the level of his students. Still he narrated hadith from them, because he has no issue with that. And he was a very studious person. So he studied a lot, and he was very careful with his time. One day it was said to him, إِلَى مَتَى تَسْمَعُ? Until when you keep going to, chasing scholars and listening to hadith? He says, إِلَى الْمَمَاتِ, till death, till the moment of death. And one day they told him, until when you keep seeking knowledge? He says, maybe the statement in which there is benefit for me that's going to really help me, I haven't heard it yet. Maybe I haven't come across it yet. So I'm going to keep seeking knowledge until the last minute in my life. Because maybe where my benefit is, or the most important benefit that I should be getting, maybe I haven't arrived at it yet. There was a phenomenon as well. The scholars at that time, they wrote with their pens were not as good as ours, right? So they didn't have these fancy pens or pencils to write with. What did they use? They used ink and they used feather. So they used feather. So has anyone tried to use feather with ink? It's very messy. Your hands will be full of ink all of the time. And not only your hands, your clothes as well. So the clothes of the students and the scholars were usually messy, full of ink, all over their garments. So that was a common thing. This is why Abdullah ibn Mubarak says, Al-Hibru fi thiyab khaluq al-ulama. He says, the ink on the clothes is the beautification of the scholars. That shows this person is doing some work, right? He's writing, he's reading, and he's doing some work. So the more ink he has on his clothes, the more work, hard work he's actually doing. There's something funny, I just remember, there was, I know around that time, there was two scholars met together, and one of them noticed on the other person's garment, there was some orangey color. And orangey color comes from what? Something we cook with. Saffron. Za'faran, saffron. So he looked at that and he says, so he brought his ink bottle and he took some ink and he covered that orangey color on the thumb of the other man. And he said, for the scholars, it's better to be messy with ink rather than saffron, because saffron was a sign of people who are wealthy. So he says, keep ink, it's better than this color, saffron's color. Okay. Something that was very well known about Abdullah ibn Mubarak. Yes, he traveled a lot, but when he was in his city, Maru, he would stay at home most of the time. So he'd go to the salah, but he would spend most of his time at home. And he was blamed about that. But that's something we can actually learn from. You know what I noticed today? Some people have no life at home. They have no life at home. There's no relationship between the father and his children, the mother and her children. They have to go out. They either go shopping, they go to the mall, they go to the library, they go to the park, they go to a friend's house, they come to the masjid, but at home they have no life. There's nothing. Like the house is more like a hotel for them to sleep in, and that's it. Nothing. There's no life in the house. There's no legacy in the house. There's no family atmosphere in the house. That is very dangerous for the kids. Very dangerous. You know, you might be working hard, yes, you might be trying your best for your kids, but the quality time that a parent spends with their kids is much more precious for the child, not only emotionally, but for their maturity, for their emotional growth, for their personal growth, for their wisdom, and for their emotional balance in life. The time they spend with their parents is very essential. They learn a lot from just being in your presence. Children learn from their parents just by being in their presence. So you need to invest time with your children. If you are a parent or you're planning to be a parent soon, you need to spend time with your children, quality time. And sometimes even, as often as possible, spend time with each one of them individually. Individually. Because they need that from you. Each one of them is different. A girl is different than a boy. They need to ask you some questions. They need to connect to you and bond with you. They need to learn from your wisdom, from how you speak. They just need to feel that they are your companion. This helps them mature and grow. Believe me, you can't do away with this. You can't sacrifice this for money, for wealth, for any other benefit. You can't. Believe me, you can't. And for them, as memories, the time that they would remember is actually the time they spend with you. It's not how hard you work to buy them a bicycle. It's not how hard you work to own a home. And these are good things if you can do them, but make sure your priority is actually spending the time. Spend time without judgment. So don't police them. So when you spend time with them, be your friend. Be their friend. Be their friend. Let them be comfortable. Let them open up to you. And this should be a regular practice. This should be a regular practice. We Muslims need to do this if we really care for our children, especially with the huge amount of influence that they are getting in school. It's destroying their minds. Yes, they are teaching them very good stuff, but in the school there's a lot of bullying. There is a lot of groups. There's a lot of ridicule. There's a lot of fun made of our children. There's a lot of different types of bullying that are taking place. There's a lot of hidden, tacit influence in terms of what they should believe, what's right and what's wrong. There's a lot of pressure, peer pressure. There's a lot of social pressure from teachers, from the staff, from the students. You have to be like this. Why don't you speak with girls? Why don't you drink? Why don't you smoke? Why don't you watch that stuff? Why don't you have dogs? Why don't you do this? You're weird, You're not even a normal human being. Why don't you have this? Why don't you have that? Why do you dress up like that? Why do you behave like this? Right? So this kind of bombardment on the kids takes a toll. And it throws them out of balance. And when they don't have a strong bond with their parents, they don't know who to go to. They feel lonely. They feel lonely. And that makes them weaker. So they start questioning. They end up questioning, are we on the true religion? Is it true that what we believe in? They start questioning. Is it worth it that I go against all of this pressure? Are all these people wrong and we are right? Even though we don't even have love in the family. We don't even have a home, something to call home. So spending time, when I look around, I see non-Muslims actually pay a lot of, not all of them, but the ones that are educated, the ones that are socially aware, they actually make it a point to spend a lot of time with their kids. A lot of time, quality time with their kids. And they do it by different things. They take them to the cinema, they take them individually, they take them to a restaurant, they go walk out with them, they walk in the morning, they have a morning walk just with one of their children. So each day they have one of them and they speak with them, they let the children open up and they create this bond and this love. And what I notice a lot, and I make a point to actually investigate and ask about this is very, very uncommon among Muslims. Very uncommon. And we think parenting is all about telling the child, do this, do that, you're right, you're wrong, you're bad, you're good, and that's it. That's not parenting. Kids don't learn from this. Kids actually, rebel and they resist that kind of thing. But they open up to you and they will be willing to listen and trust you, and they would trust you even more than any external sources like their friends, the media, social media, the school, teachers, any kind of influence. If they trust you, they would go to you for information. And if they want the truth, they want an opinion that they trust, they'll come to you. But you need to create this bond with them. So this is something we Muslims need to spend time at home. I've seen some families, and I've seen some mothers. They can't even stay at home. They say there's nothing to do at home. So straight away they take their kids to the park. They even come to the masjid. They come to the masjid, chat with other sisters, or brothers chat with some other brothers, and they let the child loose, play around with other kids. Where's your relationship with your child? If you are a stay-at-home mom and you have your child at home, that's an opportunity for you to bond with them, spend time with them, teach them. They will learn from you so much. We humans learn by mixing with others more than we learn from reading and writing and instruction. That's a very small, a tiny percentage of what we learn, that we learn directly, academically. What we learn most, we learn from mixing. We learn unconsciously. So it's very important to keep this in mind. So Abdullah ibn Mubarak used to spend a lot of time at home. A lot of time. Obviously it would be with his family, but another time, most of his time he would spend it reading the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That shows again that if you want to excel in any area, you need to spend time alone. You need to do your homework. You need to learn to stay at home. Do your homework. So he used to spend a lot of time studying. Even one of his teachers, Nu'aym ibn Hammad, he says, كان عبد الله بن المبارك يكثر الجلوس في بيته فقيل له ألا تستوحش. Abdullah ibn Mubarak used to spend a lot of time in his house. So people told him, don't you feel lonely? Don't you feel lonely? فقال كيف أستوحش وأنا مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وأصحابه. He said, how would I feel lonely when I am in the company of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم and his companions? He's studying hadith. So he's studying the life of the Prophet, the life of the companion, and he brings it to life in his mind, so he doesn't feel lonely. He doesn't feel lonely. Something similar was said by Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala. So again, Abdullah Mubarak had a very diverse kind of exposure to sciences and knowledge, and he learnt a lot. And it is, in his time, by the way, was very turbulent times. So Dawla al-Umayyah, Umayyad Caliphate at his time, that it was in its last stages. That was a very difficult time. There was a lot of revolutions against the Umayyads. A lot of revolutions. People would be dying in the thousands. And people would be fighting and fight back and so on and so forth. And then there started to be, that's when the time when translations started to take place. First from Persian, knowledge of the Persians, then from Sanskrit and from the Indian subcontinent, some knowledge was brought and translated. And then later on from the Greek and Roman philosophers. all of this was translated. So the Muslim scholars, some of them were able to actually have good exposure to these sciences and learn from them and master them. Master them and use them, use what is good for them, know what is wrong and what is faulty, and show and expose it. But what was good, they actually managed to use it and develop it and implement it. Anyway, so Abdullah al-Mubarak, when he visited Mecca, he met a lot of the scholars, specifically Sufyan ibn Uyayna. Sufyan ibn Uyayna, who was the scholar of Mecca, scholar of Hadith in Mecca. And he met Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad as well, the close friend, the famous worshipper and the close friend of Imam Abu Hanifah. So when Abdullah al-Mubarak left Mecca, these two were giving him farewell. So Fudayl ibn Iyad, Sufyan ibn Uyayna. One of them said, هذا إمام أهل المشرق. This is the Imam of the whole East. When you say Al-Mashriq among the Arabs, it's Iraq and whatever is further east. That's Al-Mashriq. And Al-Maghrib was Al-Sham, Egypt, and the whole of, like, you can say Europe, North Africa. That was Al-Maghrib. So one of them said, this is Imam Ahl al-Mashriq, this is the Imam of the East. The other one said, no, he's the Imam of the East and the West. He's such an amazing scholar. An-Nasa'i, the famous muhaddith, who has the book of hadith, As-Sunan, he says, لا نعلم في عصر ابن المبارك أجل من ابن المبارك ولا أعلى منه ولا أجمع لكل خصلة محمودة منه. He says, we don't know in the time of Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak anyone who is greater than him, or anyone who is more noble than him, or anyone who has gathered as much goodness within himself as Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak. Ibn al-Mubarak excelled in the science of hadith, so he was specifically a muhaddith. That was probably his top specialty. And he's amongst the most trusted narrators of hadith in all the books of hadith. One day a man came to Yahya ibn Ma'in. Yahya ibn Ma'in is well known to be one of the main scientists of Ar-Rijal, knowing the narrators of hadith. So he asks him, he says, Ya Aba Zakariya, man kana athbata fi Ma'mar, Abdul Razzaq or Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak? He says to him, who was the most accurate narrator who narrated from Ma'mar? Was it Abdul Razzaq or was it Abdullah ibn Mubarak? So Yahya ibn Ma'in was like on his side like this. Then he sat up and he looked at that man and he said, وَكَانَ مُتَّكِئًا فَاسْتَوَى جَالِسًا وَقَالَ كَانَ ابْنُ الْمُبَارَكِ خَيْرًا مِنْ عَبْدِ الرَّزَّاقِ وَمِنْ أَهْلِ قَرْيَتِهِ ثُمَّ قال تضم عبد الرزاق إلى عبد الله. So he says, although Abdul Razzaq, I think he's talking about Abdul Razzaq al-San'ani, like top scholar of his time in hadith. So the man said, who is more of an accurate narrator from Ma'mar? Was it Abdul Razzaq or Abdullah al-Mubarak? So Yahya ibn Ma'in said, Abdullah al-Mubarak was better than Abdul Razzaq and his whole town. And then he said to him, you combine both together at the same level? He's questioning the questioner. He's saying, you're putting them at the same level? You shouldn't be asking this question. That's what he means. Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, the famous scholar and the student of Imam al-Shafi'i, he says, Al-A'immatu Arba'a. The Imams are four. Sufyan al-Thawri, wa Malik ibn Anas, wa Hammad ibn Zayd, wa ibn al-Mubarak. These are the Imams of their time. Hammad ibn Usama al-Kufi, again one of the scholars of that time, he said, Ibn al-Mubarak fi ashab al-hadith mithlu amir al-mu'minina fi an-nas. He says, Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, among the scholars of hadith, he's the amir. He's like Amir al-Mu'mineen, the chief of the believers. That's his position among the scholars of hadith. His memory, again we said from a young age, remember he memorized the whole khutbah. So he says, ما أوردت على قلبي شيئا فخانني. He says, I've never run anything through my mind, like I've never read or heard anything. That's basically, I never paid attention to anything, and and my heart never let me, or my mind never let me down. My memory never let me down. So he says, anything that I put my attention on, I memorized it. I never forgot it. A person called Nadr ibn Musawir asked him, هل تحفظ الحديث? Like when you memorize hadith, do you like repeat it and memorize it? You know, when we memorize something, we keep repeating it, right? So he says his color changed. Abdullah al-Mubarak, when he was asked this question, his color changed, like he was surprised. Why do you ask such a question? Then he says, ما تحفظت حديثا قط إنما آخذ الكتاب فأنظر فيه فما اشتهيته علق بقلبي. He says, like, I never made it a point to memorize a hadith. Never made a point to memorize one hadith. I just pick up the book, then I read. Anything that my heart loves, it will memorize it. Anything that appeals to me, I would straight away commit it to memory without having to do any effort. Subhanallah. And one day Abdullah ibn Mubarak visits Hammad ibn Zayd. Hammad ibn Zayd is actually one of his teachers. So he visits Hammad ibn Zayd, but because Abdullah ibn Mubarak excelled, he was considered to match the level of his own teachers. So he visits Hammad ibn Zayd, and the students of Hammad ibn Zayd were there. So they say to their teacher, Hammad ibn Zayd, get Abdullah ibn Mubarak to give us some hadith. So Abdullah Mubarak says, Subhanallah, Ya Aba Ismail, أحدث وأنت حاضر. He says, Subhanallah, you want me to give hadith when you are here? I can't. Like he's talking to his teacher. So his teacher says, أقسمت لتفعلا. I swear by Allah, you will just give them some hadith, narrate some hadith. So Abdullah ibn Mubarak, out of his memory, starts narrating a number of hadith. All of them are taken from Hammad himself. All of them are from their teacher. Okay, so that shows as well that he had very good memory and he could choose what to call from his memory or recall. Despite his knowledge and his memory, when he taught and when he sat down to teach hadith, he would read it from his book, from his records. Why? Because he wanted to be sure. Just like we said that Imam Ahmad had adopted a similar kind of approach. Although he memorized all the hadith, but he would still teach by reading from his own book. He was also called the doctor, at-tabib. Why? Because he mastered the science of hadith completely, that he could fix and find out any issue with any hadith. So he was called the tabib, or the doctor. One of the scholars of hadith, Yahya ibn Adam, he says, كنت إذا طلبت الدقيق من المسائل فلم أجده في كتب ابن المبارك أيست منه. He says, if I needed a very delicate, very precise issue in the science of hadith that I know you can only find in the best of books, I would check the books of Ibn al-Mubarak. If I didn't find it there, I would lose hope. Because I know if Abdullah ibn Mubarak didn't get it, no one else would get it. Okay, so that shows the level of his mastery in the science of hadith. Some of his teachers, the most famous of his, he said he had 4,000 teachers. Some of the most famous, Sufyan al-Thawri. Sufyan al-Thawri taught him hadith. He was the Imam of hadith at his time, Sufyan al-Thawri. So he took hadith mainly from Sufyan al-Thawri. And then he studied with Imam Malik ibn Anas. So he learned from Malik ibn Anas, he studied his Muwatta, and he stayed with him in Medina, and he learned from him his fiqh as well. And most importantly, he learned from Abu Hanifah. So he studied with Abu Hanifah for such a long time. And he used to admire Abu Hanifah so much. And as I said, for him the fiqh of Abu Hanifah was the best. So he said, I've never seen anyone who understands fiqh like Abu Hanifah. That's what Abdullah ibn Mubarak said. And I mentioned, when we talked about the life of Abu Hanifah, we mentioned that Abdullah ibn Mubarak was in Sham with Al-Awza'i. He was studying with Al-Awza'i. So Al-Awza'i, when he first asked him, he said, Ya Khurasani. He speaks to Abdullah ibn Mubarak, he says, you are from Khurasan. He says, ما هذا المبتدع الذي ظهر فيكم? Who's this person of bid'ah who appeared among you in Kufa? He's talking about Abu Hanifah. Because we said some people spread false rumors against Abu Hanifah and they reached Al-Awza'i. So Abdullah ibn Mubarak didn't say anything, but he had his books, what he learned from Abu Hanifah, in a book. So he left it in the masjid, and when Imam Al-Awza'i picked it up and he read it after Fajr, he loved it. He fell in love with it. So Abdullah ibn Mubarak asked him, he says, how do you find this book? He says, this man is a scholar. And he left it without a title, without the author, without the person. It's just the hadith. So Abdullah ibn Mubarak asks Al-Awza'i, he says, do you advise me to learn from this person? He says, absolutely. He says, that's Abu Hanifah, by the way. So Imam al-Awza'i changed his mind. This is when he met Abu Hanifah, Imam al-Awza'i in Mecca, in Hajj. He spoke with him, he was amazed at the level of his understanding. He realized what was spread about Abu Hanifah was untrue. Okay, let's talk about the scientific methodology of Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak. First of all, he was very careful. He was very careful, and he would take a lot of precautions when he taught. So he would only take from authentic, reliable narrators. He would not take anything. And he would document everything. Now his books, his notebooks that he wrote with his own hands, that's his knowledge that he learned from his teachers, and he had it in his home, was 21,000 volumes. 21,000 volumes handwritten by him. That was his knowledge. He kept it in a record. So he was very careful. Number two, he paid a lot of attention to the chains of narration. So he would not narrate, he would not accept a hadith, he would not teach without mentioning the sanad. As-sanad or al-isnad, which is the chain of narration. And he used to say, al-isnadu min ad-din. That's his famous statement. He said, al-isnadu min ad-din. وَلَوْلَا الْإِسْنَادِ لَقَالَ مَنْ شَاءَ مَا شَاءَ. He says, isnad is from religion. Chains of narration, studying of the study of them is from the deen, from Islam. And he says, had it not been for the chains of narration, for the isnad, anyone would say whatever they like. Right? They would say the Prophet ﷺ said this and that. They would fabricate and make up a hadith. But he said so, al-isnad, so he paid great attention to al-isnad. He was very meticulous, very careful, very precise with al-jarh wa ta'deel, with checking the reliability of the narrators of hadith. And he was very just, by the way, because some people went to extremes. They would, like anyone who had a mistake or something, they would overgeneralize it, and they would sometimes go to extremes in considering a narrator to be unreliable. And this is, by the way, why when he studied with, we said with 4,000 scholars, he did not narrate from all of them. He narrated from 1,000. Because he would narrate from the most reliable. And there are people that he studied with and benefited from, but he knows they have issues with their memories. They will quote a hadith and mix two hadith together, or mess them up. He would not narrate from these, but he would not speak ill of them as well. He would warn, he would say, for example, one of his teachers was Abbad ibn Kathir. Abbad ibn Kathir, al-Thaqafi al-Basri, a known worshipper, very righteous man, and even knowledgeable. But he used to make a lot of mistakes when he narrates the hadith. So Abdullah al-Mubarak, he said he was a very righteous man, a very good man, knowledgeable man, but with hadith, his narration is not reliable. Why? Because he mixes up narrations. He would come up sometimes with strange statements. So he said, you cannot take his statements. But in terms of righteousness, in terms of knowledge, he's a very righteous person. So he was accurate. He would not, write the person off completely. No, he was good at that, but he has an issue there. So with that issue, you be careful. You don't take from him hadith for the sake of narration. He was also very meticulous in the terminology that he used when he narrated hadith. So for example, one thing, among the scholars of hadith, if you say haddathana or haddathani, that means he narrated to me straight away. That narrator narrated. So I heard from him directly from his mouth to my ear. That's what it means. But the scholars also use another statement which is akhbarana or akhbarani. He informed us. Akhbarani and akhbarana is known among the scholars of hadith. It's not necessary that the teacher actually made the statement. It could be one of the students was reading from a book and this scholar was listening to it and approving it. And you were in that gathering, that was considered a way of conveying narrations. Was a way, like for example, Imam Malik, he would not read his Muwatta. One of his students would be reading the hadith. So if you heard it in that gathering, and Imam Malik was there, he approved it as it was read, then you can narrate this hadith from Imam Malik and you can say akhbarani or akhbarana. Okay, but you can't say haddathani unless it was a statement directly from his mouth to your ears. So Imam Abdullah al-Mubarak was very careful with using these two statements, although some scholars used to mix them up. But for him, he was very careful and meticulous with all of this. He also he made a good combination between Science of Hadith, we said he studied with Sufyan al-Thawri, Science of Hadith, and he studied with Abu Hanifah, Madrasat al-Ra'i. So he learned from both Madrasat al-Ra'i and Madrasat al-Hadith. So he managed to combine both in a very nice way. In a very nice way. But he was more heavily leaning towards Hadith. But still, he had a lot of knowledge in al-Ra'i. And this is why he had a famous statement in order to advise his students. He used to say, لِيَكُنِ الَّذِي يُعْتَمَدُ عَلَيْهِ الرَّأِي الْحَدِيث أو الْأَثَرِ. Let the thing that you rely upon most is the hadith, the narration, al-athar. وَخُذْ مِنَ الرَّأْيِ مَا يُفَسِّرُ لَكَ الْحَدِيث. Then take from al-ra'i, from understanding, and from people who have understanding and people who use logic, take from that whatever explains for you the hadith and helps you understand it. So that summarizes his methodology, combining the ra'i and the hadith. Because there was a dispute between Ahl al-Hadith. They would say, that's hadith, take the apparent meaning, don't get it, don't even try to explain it more. That's as it is, take it as it is. Whereas Ahl al-Ra'i, they used to take a logical points. If this is haram, then what is similar to it is haram. Okay, what's different from it is not necessarily haram, and so on and so forth. So they would draw a lot of logical points. So what he said, neither of them is wrong. You need to take the hadith, but you also use a ra'i to help you understand the hadith deeper. That was his methodology. His aqidah was the aqidah of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. So at his time there was a lot of like Shiaism started to appear, and so he stressed the respect for the companions, ta'aleem al-sahaba. He also was against innovations and bid'ah, so he was upon the methodology of the Salaf, or the early generations, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And he used to say, لِيَكُنْ مَجْلِسُكَ مَعَ الْمَسَاكِينَ وَإِيَّاكَ أَن تُجَالِسَ صَاحِبَ بِدْعَةٍ. So, spend your time with even laymen. It's better than spending it with people who seem to be learned, but they are people of bid'ah and innovation. And from his justice, he used to narrate from narrators of hadith who were involved in bid'ah, as long as they did not call to their bid'ah. So the scholars of hadith have differed. Do we narrate from narrators who actually were involved in bid'ah? That was a big dispute among the scholars, by the way. Imam Malik was on the side that you don't narrate anything from them. Whereas other scholars of hadith, like Abdullah ibn Mubarak, he was of the opinion, if they do not call openly to their bid'ah, we can take their hadith, if they are known for their truthfulness, by the way. And this was the opinion of the majority of the muhaddithin, by the way. That's the opinion of the majority of the muhaddithin. So he was asked, لما رويت عن سعيد وهاشم الدستوائي وتركت حديث عمرو بن عبيد ورأيهم واحد. These are all Mu'tazila, people who were involved in some i'tizal. So he says, so they say to him, why did you narrate from Sa'id and Hisham al-Dastawai, but you did not narrate from Amr ibn Ubaid? And they're upon the same thing. He said, Amr used to call people to his belief, which is corrupt, which is false. But the other guys were not. They did not openly speak. They kept it to themselves. So I take their narrations. And he was very strong against the Mu'tazila. He used to see the Qadariyya, the people who used to say Allah doesn't know what is going to happen, as kuffar. He was accused of being a murji'. He was accused with al-irja'. And this happens today as well with some people. Allah musta'an. But he was free from that. And with the names and attributes of Allah, he used to be on the way of as-salaf, which is their meaning as they are in the Quran and the Sunnah. They are true, and we don't ask how. We believe in them as they are, and we leave them as they came through the revelation. He wrote so many books, most of his books are missing. He wrote many books, but most of his books went missing, as manuscripts were missing. Some parts were found. The books that are printed that I have found are Kitab al-Birri Kitab al-Zuhd wal-Raqa'iq. That's his famous book, Imam al-Barak, Kitab al-Zuhd. And Kitab al-Jihad. He was the first one to write a book specifically on jihad. These are the two books that I know from him that are being in print, available in print. Okay, so that was the life of Imam Abdullah ibn Mubarak. He lived 63 years. He lived 63 years. He was in jihad. By the way, he used to take part in jihad often, most of the time. So he was a scholar, he was a merchant, businessman, and he was also a person who would take part in military expeditions often, very often. So one day he comes back from a battle, and he was close to Baghdad in a town called Heat, and he dies there at age 63, and he died in Ramadan. He died on the 10th of Ramadan, rahimahullah ta'ala. But subhanallah, this man, still his name until today is alive. May Allah have mercy upon him. Okay, jazakumullah khairan. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.